Hey gang, it's your boy Platt, back with another episode of Value Spirits. Today I got something from a little north of the border, Windsor Canadian whiskey. I purchased this bottle at $9.99, so around $10, which is fine at for, and it comes in at 80 proof. So those two numbers right there tell us we probably already got a little bit of value. Now let's read the bottle, see what we got here. Imported all the way from Canada. Windsor Canadian blended Canadian whiskey. A supremely smooth whiskey made with waters born in the clear, clean Canadian Rockies, blended and distilled under supervision of the Canadian government, so you know it's good. And again, they will remind you, product of Canada. Now, real quick, this is a good place to start. What is the difference between Canadian whiskey and, let's say, American whiskey? One of the big differences is here in the U.S., if we make bourbon, by law it has to be 51% corn, but they add other grains like wheat, rye, barley. But they're all thrown together, they all get crushed, thrown together, brewed as a beer, and then ferment out, and then distilled. The way the Canadian whiskey makers do it is they utilize the same grains, but they do it individually. So they'll create a corn beer, a wheat beer, a rye beer, a barley beer, ferment those out individually, distill them out individually, and I believe even age them individually, then come back to blend them together to the flavor profile that the blender of each brand wants to hit. Whatever that flavor profile, they'll blend all those individual components, where a bourbon maker would combine all those grains in the portion of the flavor profile they're looking for, and then ferment, distill, and then age. So that's the difference between the two, and you'll see what it'll come out in a difference of flavor. We'll get into that a little bit more. As far as the history of the brand, there's not a lot of information out there. Apparently, the brand itself was started in 1887 by a gentleman named Walter Kerr. He was a veteran, respected veteran of the whiskey industry up in Canada, and this apparently was one of the brands he created. Canada, remember, did not have to go through Prohibition 100 years ago like we did here, so those brands were able to continue a little easier, like every other whiskey market consolidation later came in. This today is produced by Alberta distillers. They produce other brands. I believe Alberta Premium might be one of the more well-known of their other lines. Now, their story starts in 1946 in Calgary, Alberta. They, years later, in 1987, I believe, were brought by Fortune Brands. Fortune Brands was, at the time, Jim Beam's parent company. And the company's changed names over the years. In 2011, it became Beam Suntory, and today it's known as Suntory Global Spirits. So this is part of the Jim Beam Suntory, massive line of products. This is just one of many of their spirits. Now, again, not a ton of information on the product or as far as the history goes. I did go to their website and I saw some of the selling points, and I thought it'd be a great place to start with that. One of the things they really kind of pushes, and they even mention it on the bottle, is that clear, clean, beautiful water of the Canadian Rockies. If you've ever seen photos of the area, it's absolutely beautiful, and the glacier waters. The reality of that in a production level reality, whether you're brewing beer or distilled spirits, is you filter your water yourself. You're not just taking a garden hose to your brew kettle or whatever. So you do treat the water already. They kind of talk about it similar to the way the bourbon makers in Kentucky and the moonshiners in Tennessee talk about their limestone water. The reality is, they're always going to utilize some clean water. The clean, clear part is pretty universal. There may be mineralogy adjustments. That's, again, one of the things with the bourbon makers. We've got the limestone, we don't have to add certain minerality to our water, which does make a difference in the fermentation end of the process. Next, they refer to the use of local grains or prairie grains. Alberta is not too far, if not in the breadbasket of Canada, so that they have local sources of high quality grains, which is a nice story. They also talk about the use of you use bourbon barrels. The Scotch people use a lot of ex-bourbon barrels. One thing I've noticed about the Canadian whiskey makers is they have not gotten really into the sherry barrel finish or port barrel finish, wine barrel finish, Madeira barrel, what have you. They've kind of stuck with, the traditional used bourbon barrels. And then lastly, the thing they really talk about on their website, and something I want to discuss so people don't get confused, is they are proud to say that they are the only Canadian whiskey producer, I believe, that produces 100% rye spirit. And they talk about that. Now, what in here is not rye. This is not rye whiskey. This is a blend. They're referring to the rye component of this being 100%. Now, you may say, well, why wouldn't it be? If you're going to do all these separate, wouldn't it be 100% corn, 100% rye, 100% wheat? Rye is a tough grain to work with, whether you're brewing a rye beer or, again, making rye whiskey. And a lot of times in producing a rye, you'll throw a little bit of malted barley in because barley has a huge amount of enzymes that help convert starch into sugar. Rye does not have that much. So even if you buy a rye whiskey here in the States, a lot of times it's going to have anywhere from 5% to 10% to 15%, some usually malted barley into it. Even the people that source rye whiskeys, like an MGP, you go look in their websites, and they sell, I think, a 99.5 and a 95.5 variation and a 99.1 with 1% malted barley. It doesn't take a lot of malted barley to help out, and that's why it's hard to find 100% rye. So they're very proud of that aspect, but don't get that confused with what's in the bottle. That's only a part of what's in the bottle. So this shouldn't have an overall dominance of that rye spice and peppery notes and aggressive notes of a true rye. They're just talking about their rye aspects, that they do it pure. They claim to have a special yeast that kind of helps work through this. Now they're just superior technicians in dealing with rye. So that's their story. And this does also kind of contribute to, a lot of people refer to Canadian whiskeys as rye. They have a rye component, but they're not 100% rye or even high, over 50% rye. But that term gets used. But I just wanted to go over that to let you know that when you drink a Canadian whiskey, you may hear the term rye. Like CC, Canadian Club gets referred to as rye a lot of times. It is not the rye that, if you buy here in the States, a traditional rye whiskey that may be 75-80% rye or more, you will notice the difference between those two products for sure. So that being said, though, let's jump in and try some Windsor Canadian. All right, well, nice little light caramel color. The nose fairly straightforward and simple. Some light sweet vanilla notes. No age statement here, so we're not, and in my research, I didn't really see how long they're carrying this stuff. 2 to 3 years, I'm going to guess, especially at that price point. So let's give her a try. Easy like Sunday morning. That is, there's not a lot there. A little bit of sweetness toward the front. Again, there's a corn component. 80 proof, you're not getting a real burn. The finish is short to medium-ish. That being said, we've seen on the bottle, they use the term smooth. If you hear anybody talk about Canadian whiskey, they talk about smooth. These folks, you find folks in Canada, as an American, I want to thank you for making a really good whiskey for mixers. And that's what really this stuff is great for. Cola, lemon lime soda, ginger ale, what have you. They make a nice, easy drinking whiskey that works well with those. The folks in Canada, like I said, they don't let one of the grain, components kind of overshadow the other. They kind of blend them together, which again kind of balances out certain extreme flavor compounds. Again, the sweetness of corn, the spice of rye. There's certain flavor components of like a single malt Scotch, or just a single malt whiskey, rye, barley predominant. This kind of smooths them all out, and it just works great with colas. They're not going high proof. Again, they're not doing sherry port finishes. So what that also means is that a tasting like this, I'm not going to say, oh my God, I get a cherry finish, or man, those barrel notes, this must have been an alligator cherry. You're not going to get that, but you're going to get a nice whiskey that goes down easy and mixes well with colas. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please hit subscribe down below. Also, please like the other videos because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or value spirits you want me to try, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.